Hey, what's up, everyone? It is time for another edition of Ask Mike with our senior analyst, Mike Irwin. And let's not waste any time. Let's just get to the questions.
Okay.
First one comes from JoJo Hog on Facebook, who asks, what do you think about the Hogs' NCAA seeding? Looks like Colgate could be a trap game. How does the 3 seed end up with a game like that? The selection committee stuck it to us.
Yeah, it's not really as bad as it sounds. I mean, what everybody's reacting to is these crazy numbers offensively that they have. They're among the top 5 or 6 teams in the country in scoring.
Yeah. They're
among the top 10 in shooting. They're shooting like almost right at 50% from, and this isn't a lot of layups. Their top 4 scorers are guards.
Yeah.
And they're shooting 50% with those guys. And they're not a small team either. They've got 3 guys they rotate in, 2 in particular, one's 6'10", one's 6'11", so they're not small. So all that sounds really scary.
Right.
Here's the problem. They've played the craziest schedule I've ever seen. Now, part of it is COVID. Most of it is COVID. But the Patriot League is just nuts. It's 10 teams divided into 3 divisions.
Yeah.
So, number one, what they decided to do was we're only going to play conference games.
Yeah.
All right. So at least Colgate was in the 4-team division. Think about if you were in one of those 3-team divisions.
Yeah.
Because what happens is you end up playing the same 4 teams over and over. Let me look at it here. Okay, they played Army 4 times, Boston U 4 times, Holy Cross 4 times. That's your regular season.
Yep.
And those teams aren't any good. Army's the only one with a winning record. They were 12-9. All the rest of them have losing records. And then when they got into their conference tournament, they played Boston U again, and then they played Loyola Maryland and Bucknell, and both of them have losing records. So the combined record of their opponents is 35-49. So look, they don't. You talk about quad 1 wins. I don't think they have quad 6 wins or whatever. It's not good. And you compare it to Arkansas' schedule, they got all these quad 1 wins, and they've got all these NCAA tournament teams that they beat. So there's no comparison in the competition between the 2 teams. Now, I've also looked at video from some of these games, and it's interesting because their guards drive a lot to the basket. You know why they drive a lot to the basket? Because they are so good on the 3-point shooting perimeter that what these teams that they were playing did was they were all spread out and trying to be in your face and prevent these 3-point shots. And then they were just spread out, and so they just dribble right through the middle of their defense and get these easy layups. Arkansas is more athletic. I'm sure they'll be out on the perimeter some, but I don't see a 6-foot guard driving in there and Jalen Williams standing there, what do I do now?
Let him go.
So
don't see that.
All of that looks pretty good for Arkansas. Yeah, you could get a trap game. Here's what I remember Corey Beck telling me one time. He was talking about the first NCAA game he played in. I think it was North Carolina A&T or whatever, and I think it was in Oklahoma City, but he said what surprised him was how everything changes when you get in an NCAA tournament game.
I agree with that, yeah.
Because suddenly everybody knows it's a big stage, but it's also your last game if you lose. So he said, the guy I'm guarding, I looked at plenty of video of him, but he jumped higher than I thought he could, and he was quicker than I thought he was. And he probably was better than he'd ever been. And so it took me part of the game to adjust to that. And that was a close game at halftime. Arkansas ended up winning it. But I think that's the thing Arkansas may have problems with, because all of these guys are new. None of them have played in the NCAA tournament. So maybe they'll be a little out of sync, disjointed. They've done that anyway this year. They've been slow starting. But I think, certainly by halftime as you get into the game, I think you're going to see Arkansas's talent start to take hold. I just don't see Arkansas having huge issues with a team that's played virtually nobody.
So don't.
There's that one thing, I think they played Tennessee last year.
Right, which is what everyone keeps bringing up, is that they played Tennessee pretty well in the tournament. But I mean,
so I could be wrong, but I just don't think it's as scary as some people think it is.
The 14-1 record, I think, makes them look a little more scary than they might be. All right, our next question comes from Lanny, who asks, did losing Jalen Williams cost Arkansas the LSU game?
I don't think it did. Arkansas lost that game basically with poor free throw shooting. I got some numbers here. They shot 59% in that game when they normally shoot 74%. They shot 4 more free throws and made 2 less than LSU. So if you make your normal number of free throws, that makes up for the difference. It was going to be a close game anyway. And I think that had more of an effect than Jalen Williams not being there. Now, if he'd been in there, it might have helped.
Yeah.
But they, you know, they were okay inside. They had plenty of rebounds and block shots and things like that. It wasn't like they just got shredded inside.
No.
So it's certainly good to have him back, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I don't think that was the deciding factor in the game. And the bottom line is you come out of that now with an extra guy inside.
Yeah.
So
I think they made some uncharacteristic mistakes in that game, too, that they haven't typically made, at least over the past several weeks.
The truth is both those teams played poorly. They both had too many turnovers. They had about the same number of rebounds. The shooting was about the same. And the bottom line in that game, it came down to Arkansas was down 1 with about 25 seconds to go. And LSU, I can't remember which guy it was, but one of their guards drove toward inside the three-point line, and he went up with a running jumper, and he came down, and I think it was Moses Moody that he hit, and Moody goes back, and they'd called all these ridiculous charges all through the SEC tournament. I'm telling you, some of those charge calls were blocks or no calls.
Right.
Because you're dribbling in and somebody's moving their feet on you, and you're going to tell me because you kind of lean a little bit and the guy falls down. That's a flop. And they were calling that charging. So they call those, but they don't call it legitimate where your momentum carries you into a guy after you shoot. And if they wave that off, call it a charge, the basket doesn't count, it remains a 1-point game, and then Arkansas, with 24 seconds left, can go down and work for a last-second shot. Maybe they would have missed it, but the point is they would have had a shot. So it's not like, you know, they just got blown out or something.
Exactly.
It was a close game and could have gone either way, and that's just the way it worked out.
Definitely going to be good to have Jalen back, though, for the NCAA tournament. But, all right, our next question comes from Razorback Redneck on Hogville, who wants to know, what was up with the ump in yesterday's Hog baseball game? That was the widest strike zone I've ever seen. I think I remember Mike saying that as well.
I think what you had was a home plate umpire on Sunday. Those guys had worked that series all weekend.
Yeah.
Maybe he wants to go home early. So the strike zone gets like from here to about here.
Got a little wider.
And then the game goes really fast.
Yep.
But where that really had an impact was Arkansas had 2 on and 1 out in the top of the 9th, down 2, and their starting pitcher, who was really good, had started to run out of gas. He was up over 100 pitches, and he started to throw balls. One of those guys on base, you know, got walked, and he's now about to walk the other guy, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this ump just starts calling everything a strike. And it went that way with the last 2 batters. The last 2 batters basically had no shot because he was calling crazy wide strike zones. This is what happens in baseball. This is why you can't stay undefeated. Number one, you are eventually going to run into a really good pitcher, and you're just not going to hit him. And number two, if you give him help from a crazy umpire, when you're on the road at a place where people are going nuts anyway, it's just going to happen. So that's really what happened, and you know, there's nothing you can do about it. It's just college baseball.
Austin Hog fan wants to know, Mike, what impact do you expect the losses to the basket and baseball teams this weekend to have on the team in the next week or two?
Not much. Let's start with basketball. We know that they ended up a 3 seed. They might have gotten a 2 seed if they had, let's say they had won both games. They beat LSU and beat Alabama. Maybe they're even the highest 1 seed, but I doubt it. Probably a 2 seed. It didn't cost them a 3 seed. I look at where I've just sort of outlined, you know, where they're at, and I don't have an issue with at first when I saw it, I thought, ooh, trap game. And then you look at Texas Tech on the other side of the bracket there, and you say, well, maybe that's not good for a 3 seed. Maybe they should have gotten, you know, a better arrangement there. But then when you look at Colgate and you realize, no, maybe that's not a bad position to be in. And then you look at Texas Tech, they were good in December, early January, and then they sort of ran out of gas or collapsed or something. So that may not even be a tough game if that's the team they end up playing in the round of 32. So I don't think it really hurt the basketball team. It might end up helping because you carry that long winning streak into the tournament. Maybe you're thinking about that too, and you shouldn't be.
That's
so now that's out of the way, and you can just be free and play what you have to do.
I think it's a good thing that they lost, honestly.
In baseball, absolutely, because you can't continue to win in baseball. It's just not going to happen. They've gotten rid of that, and they're still #1 this week.
Exactly.
Because other teams, you know, the other SEC teams right behind them, they lost too. The problem Arkansas has in baseball is they're still #1, and I think that becomes a burden the longer you're #1, because there's some things maybe maybe you're not really, you're thinking to yourself, well, are we really worthy of being #1? Because this baseball team has some issues. We've seen it. And they're not perfect, and maybe they start thinking they're supposed to be perfect because they're #1, and you know, hopefully they don't do that. But I think that it was okay to lose that game, and I think it's going to be okay if at some point they're not #1. The main thing to do in baseball is be in the top 5, 6, 7, so you can be a top 8 national seed at the end of the year, get a regional and a super regional, because that's the easiest way to get to the College World Series.
Really matters. Pork Soda has our next question and wants to know, is there anyone besides KJ and Hornsby that have a legit shot in the quarterback competition?
Oh, man. I think so. I'll narrow it down even more. I think it's got to be KJ Jefferson. He's the only guy with real experience on this roster anymore. And I will say this, after looking at some of the video that we've seen so far from the first week of spring football, I think there's a reason why Sam Pittman is really emphasizing the run game more, trying to beef up that offensive line, make them better. They've added running backs. There are more running backs now. They've converted, you know, a receiver to running back. There's a reason why he's doing that. Look, KJ Jefferson may end up being a really good quarterback, but he's not Felipe Franks from a passing standpoint. He doesn't have his accuracy on the deep ball. He's got a strong arm, but he's just not as accurate. Now, what they will try to do this spring is to get him more accurate.
Exactly.
And how well they do that will have a lot to do with how well this team does in the fall. There's some other guys there besides Malik Hornsby. You got Lucas Coley, who was a 4-star guy out of high school. He's a run-pass guy. I haven't seen much of him, but I just don't think a true freshman's going to come in and win that job unless, you know, maybe Jefferson were to get hurt or something. They've got a grad transfer from Ole Miss. He's not even on scholarship. He looks a lot like Jack Lindsay, and he wears Jack Lindsay's number. And I saw the video, and I thought Jack was leaving. What's he doing out there? And I thought, well, maybe he's just going through spring hears because he's still in school.
Right.
But it turned out it was the grad transfer guy from Ole Miss. And so he's not on scholarship. I can't see him winning the job. I like Landon Rogers.
I was waiting for it.
Little Rock Parkview quarterback. He's 6'4", he's tall, he can run, he's a 4-5 guy, and he's got a strong arm. He's like a lot of guys that are more run-oriented than passing. He's got the arm, he has to get more accurate. And he's not an early enrollee like Coley. So he doesn't join the team till next summer, this coming summer. I just don't think he's going to win the job in the fall. He might somewhere down the road. Some people are projecting him to change positions. They'll eventually move him somewhere else. I don't think so.
I don't know about that.
I got my eye on him. He's an Arkansas kid. He wants to play for the Hogs.
Right.
That's all. There's always a little special thing there. And he's tall. He's got a strong arm. He can run. They want run-pass quarterbacks. Keep an eye on him, Landon Rogers.
I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some more Malik Hornsby. I'm surprised that we haven't, honestly. We only saw that little package at the goal line last year, and we all know how that went.
We'll see this spring. And I get to go to the scrimmage coming up this week.
That is right,
And I'll answer a lot of questions about be better in position to answer questions. I'm really ecstatic that they're letting us watch the scrimmage. Because you can sit and watch a whole scrimmage and really evaluate some things, and we'll see, you know, how KJ looks. We'll see how Hornsby looks. We'll see how Lucas Coley looks. We'll be able to see these things, how the running game looks. What about the offensive line? So I'm pretty excited about that.
Still a lot of question marks for that football team in general, though. All right, so Hog has our next question. Asks, since athletes are required to travel and have to subject themselves to potential COVID exposure, Shouldn't they have been in the first group to get a vaccine? They entertain millions who may be isolated and should be deemed essential in my books.
Spoken like a fan. And in my head, I can see myself thinking that. I would never say it because the common logical thing here is athletes do not get sick from COVID. They isolate and they come back. We saw that over and over again last fall in football. We've seen it in basketball. So they're not in danger health-wise. Yes, it's very annoying to have all of these disruptions. We even see NCAA tournament teams having all kinds of problems. Some baseball teams have had problems. So this is going to continue for a while in athletics. But it's just what you have to deal with because, again, they need to get those vaccines to people in high-risk groups.
Exactly.
And I don't know how high risk I am, but I'm in the age category. So I got the first one, due to get the second one on Wednesday of this week. And then I'll be vaccinated. My wife is younger than me, so she's not eligible yet. It's a little bit disjointed the way this is happening all over the country. I think it's been complicated by the fact that a lot of people that are eligible for the vaccine don't want it because they're afraid of it or they feel like it's not necessary. I'm not going to get sick. So they have all these supplies in there and ready to go after the people that are in like groups 1 and 2, but not everybody wants it. So you've got people in group 3 that want it but can't get it. It's just all kind of confusing, but in the end it'll work itself out. I think maybe by the College World Series you'll see these athletes vaccinated, and maybe that will eliminate, you know, any problems with the College World Series teams. I don't think they'll do it until it's pretty much available to everybody. But I do think by this summer, virtually everybody in the country that wants that vaccine will have had it. And then I don't think you see the issues next fall, hopefully, in football that we went through this past football season.
All right, 1967 grad wants to know, is there an option for either Tate or Smith to return for another year due to COVID year? If so, do you think either would consider staying?
They can come back, but I don't think either one of them will. And it's not because of the draft. It's not because of the NBA draft or whatever. They can play professional basketball now. And they can make decent money doing it. More money than you would probably make if you were an ordinary guy. You go through college, you get a degree, go into your field. You're going to start off kind of a lower tier job. They're going to be making more money than the average person coming out of college. There's a, you know, the clock is ticking on them though, because there's only so many years they can do that. So if it's 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, you can make a lot of money in that time. And then what you end up doing is, if you're smart and you save that money, then when you really start your career, whatever it is, maybe you've already got enough money to buy a house, you've got married, you want to buy a house. Instead of like me, when I came out of college and I started in TV in small markets and you're making $8,000 a year. Now that shows how long ago this was, but that was my first job. I got $8,000 a year. And it was, I couldn't buy a house. I could barely afford a car. If I had some money built up, that would have been so much easier. Oh, my car's paid for, my house is paid for. So this is why these guys will leave early, even though they're not NBA draft choices. I don't think either one of them are coming back.
Well, especially I think when you consider what they've done this year and what they've accomplished, they're probably good to just say, this was fun, I'm out now. All right, Snout Team says, this Razorback baseball team seems to be a great team and is getting the recognition nationally that they deserve. If you had to identify one weakness of this team, what would it be and how did they overcome it? That's a good question.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to try to break down and criticize a team that's lost one game and is #1 in the country. But I understand the question. Fans, I think, are sitting there going, well, this team is #1. Are there issues here? Will they stay #1? You know, if I had to pick one area, I would say hitting. And it's not that they don't hit the ball. They've been getting timely hitting in late innings, which has kept them undefeated as long as they did. But they don't have the kind of up and down hitting in the lineup that other really good Razorback teams have had that I've seen in the past. At least not yet. It could change. There are holes in the lineup. They're striking out a lot. Now, I made a comparison here to kind of give you an idea. Arkansas is #1 in the country. Ole Miss is #4. Vandy's #2. But you look at these numbers. Arkansas's team batting average is 274. Ole Miss 282, Vandy 323. Big difference there. Arkansas is averaging 8 hits a game, Ole Miss 10, Vanderbilt 11. Arkansas is averaging 7 runs a game, Ole Miss 8, and Vandy 9. So they don't quite have the numbers of 2 teams that are behind them from the SEC in the top 5. So that's a potential problem. You know, you can't really evaluate it completely because you'd have to compare opponents and different things like that. Arkansas has already been on the road and played a true road series. They've done everything you would. I think the teams they played at home were decent mid-majors. So it's Arkansas. The bottom line is 12-1 against a tough schedule. They've played ranked teams. They've been on the road in a tough place to play, a mid-major where it's tough to play, and they have 1 loss. And the bottom line is they've got the best record of any of those teams. So, you know, you want to pick it apart. Probably this team needs to work on its hitting and try to become a little more consistent up and down the lineup.
See, I'm surprised you didn't say pitching.
Well, I looked at it.
That's what I was thinking.
The pitching is not terrible. It's an ERA of 3.3, 3.4, which is not horrible. Vanderbilt's down below that. These other teams are below that, but it's not the issue, I think. Now, it could be later on. That's the problem when you evaluate issues. Sometimes it can change.
It changes.
I mean, for instance, this weekend, they suddenly had base running blunders. Robert Moore lays down a bunt, and I'm surprised he didn't know this because he's, you know, as much baseball knowledge he has. But that little double line that goes down from home plate to the first base, that's for you to run into. If you get over off that left side, if you get hit with the ball thrown from a catcher or really anybody else, if you're inside that line, you're out. And that's what he did. He laid down a bunt, the catcher came out. Normally what a catcher will do is move a little bit farther out because they don't want to hit the guy. But this guy looked like he did it on purpose. Because if you hit him and you see that his feet are inside that line, you hit him, he's out anyway. So you don't have to worry about how quickly your throw gets there. So there was that. They had a couple of guys just get off first base and not pay attention, and they got thrown out. So right now, you could list that as a problem, base running blunders. And they've had some errors. Robert Moore's made a couple of errors, but are you serious? Are you going to criticize this team's defense?
No.
When the season is over, they're going to be one of the best defending teams in college baseball. So right now, I'd say if there's an issue, it might be hitting, but it's not a terrible problem.
It's still early, and things will change over the next few weeks, I'm sure. But Blood Red Hog has our next question and wants to know, Moses Moody, should he stay 1 more year, or do you think he will stay?
If you're a fan, you say, yeah, stay 1 more year, Moses.
Stay.
If you're Moses Moody, you're like, are you kidding me? He's projected number 11th in the NBA draft. I mean, he's set to make a lot of money. And you could say, yeah, but he could come back. Maybe it could be 3 or 2 or whatever next year. Yeah, and he could get hurt, and there's all kinds of other things.
So many other things.
So the bottom line is, when you're set to make that kind of money, you're going to take it. And he's not somebody they're going to mess with. I mean, they'll take him, give him some time. They won't just dump him after, you know, running him through the D-League a little bit and then let him play in a couple of NBA games and go, we don't want this
we're
guy.
done with that.
They'll keep him around. So he's in a good position. Plus, sometimes it's better not to be number 1 or number 2 because you go to a better team. So So he's not coming back.
No.
He hasn't told me that.
No.
He hasn't said it publicly to anyone, but I would be the most shocked person on the planet if he returned.
In fact, I think he's done a very good job of not saying that in all of the interviews where he's been asked about that potentially happening. You know, he's like, I'm just focusing on the team, postseason, and winning a championship. So hopefully that happens. But Super Hog 1959 on Hogville wants to know, I remember a game when Eddie Sutton went up into the stands and sat with fans during a game. Why did that happen? And then he publicly made the comment that he would crawl to Kentucky. After he went to Kentucky, things soured quickly. Would you explain what happened?
Well, that's complicated. That's one of these long stories. I'm going to try to cut it down a little bit. You know, Eddie Sutton came in and was so popular, so fast at Arkansas. I don't know if he had a drinking problem when he got here, but I do know that his show got taped in Little Rock. He had to go down there, and he was in Little Rock a lot, and there were a lot of boosters down there that really liked him. They got going out to restaurants and drinking a little bit, and at some point he developed a real drinking problem. those of us in the media that covered them back then started noticing around 1980, maybe after the Final Four team, a little bit a year later. And you noticed it in some really weird things. He said odd things in press conferences. Came back from the Great Alaska Shootout one year, and they didn't win it. And when somebody was asking him, you know, some of the problems up there, he implied that the refs were in the tank to Vegas, like they were getting bought for, you know, making bets and things. And it was a totally crazy claim. I mean, if you say something like that, you better have proof and be able to back it up.
Yeah.
And I think we protected him a little bit because by that time we knew that he was a little odd in some of the things he did. I remember Bob Holt going up to him afterward and trying to get him to clarify what he meant, and he just blew it off at that point. And nobody really made an issue out of it. He just said strange things. You know, he did some things that made some of the boosters mad. There was this car dealership thing you have where they loan you a car.
Yeah.
Well, his wife had one too, and he would go duck hunting in his wife's car, and he got it stuck in a mud one time and just went off and left it. Had somebody, one of his people call and say, come and get it, and they didn't appreciate it because all dirty and muddy.
Yeah.
And Frank became aware of this stuff, and Frank was not going to confront somebody who had been as successful as Eddie directly, so he was sending like people over there to go, hey, you know, Eddie, could you,
can you not
got a problem here? And it made Eddie mad, and one night on his television show with Paul Eels, he just takes a shot at him, said something about any athletic director that doesn't support his winning basketball coach has committed political suicide. And Paul Eels like, okay, let's go to the video, trying to dodge that. But the point is, we all knew there were issues.
Yeah.
And then he sat, the incident that was mentioned in the question where it was at a basketball game, might have been at Rice. He got mad at the officials, just left the game, went up and sat with his wife in the stands, and Frank didn't like that. It was on TV. And the bottom line is, not long before he went to Kentucky, I was hearing that Frank was negotiating a buyout. Now, I don't know if this ever really happened, but the guy telling me this said that Frank had approached him one way or another about going to get help, maybe go to the Betty Ford Center, and Eddie was like, I'm not doing that. Didn't want to acknowledge he had a problem. So they, according to the guy I was talking to, they were going to start negotiating a buyout. Well, if Eddie knew that, certainly it wouldn't have been very hard for him to take the Kentucky job. But the way he portrayed that was, oh, if the minute I got the offer, I would have crawled there, because any coach like me has always wanted to go to Kentucky. So he goes to Kentucky. Problem is, he doesn't leave here. He goes for the press conference, he comes back here, and he's living here in the middle of the summer after he took the job in the late winter. And I got a phone call from a basketball writer who covered them, and he was like, what's he doing? I said, I don't know. Yeah. He's just here. And it was a little odd. And so he gets there, and I think he had a good first year, but then there start to be problems there. There was an incident with a recruit where they sent a package to this recruit, the coaching staff, and it fell out at a FedEx place or whatever, or UPS or whatever it was, and money fell out of it. And I think an assistant coach got fired over it, so that was an issue. But there was a documentary done. It was, I don't know if you saw it. I saw it about a year ago. But it was a documentary on Sutton and his problems at Kentucky. And Sean Sutton, his son, who was playing on that team, was very prominent in that documentary and talked about how it was a very difficult time for him because Eddie was out of control. They showed some video of a press conference where he was intoxicated in this press conference, and you could see it on the video. Bottom line is he got fired. And it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to him, because he then went and got help and then had the best part of his career at his alma mater, Oklahoma State. I mean, he was terrific there. And I wish I could say it was a happy ending, but right at the end of his career, he fell off the wagon again, ended up getting fired, and it looked bad there at that point. But, you know, he came over here for Darrell Walker's graduation after all these years. Darrell was getting his degree. Patsy and Eddie came over, and they were so happy that Darrell was getting the degree. I think he was okay by then. I think he'd stopped drinking again. And then he started having health problems, and we'd see him at Bud Walton Arena, and finally he was in a wheelchair. The bottom line is, he found out before he died that he did make the Naismith Hall of Fame. So the story ends well. To me, Eddie Sutton should always be remembered here as a guy that kind of put Arkansas basketball back on the map. They'd been good in the 30s and 40s, 60s and 70s, and it went downhill. He brought them back, and that led to Nolan. Then we've had another dip. But everybody knows, because of Eddie Sutton, this can be and should be a basketball school, not just a football school. And so he left a legacy with this program. Alcoholism is terrible. The people that have an addiction to alcohol, I can tell you, it is so hard to break that.
Yeah.
I've known people that sobered up for 20, 30 years and then fell off the wagon again. I knew a guy that killed himself because of that. So it's not anything to pass over. It's a very difficult problem to deal with.
Well, we've got a couple more questions here. The next one is that I see that Michigan State basketball team is now MSU presented by Rocket Mortgage. How long before one of the Razorback squads becomes Arkansas presented by Tyson Foods or something like that?
Well, hopefully not. Look, I don't have a problem with naming things after a person.
I'd agree.
For instance, the Tyson Track Center.
Right.
Because that's just the Tyson family. It doesn't say Tyson Foods Track Center, Tyson Chicken Track Center. You have Don W. Reynolds Razorback Stadium. You don't have the Don Ray Reynolds Foundation Razorback Stadium. So you're not naming it after a corporate entity, you're naming it after a person. The Jerry Jones Center, not the Dallas Cowboys Center. So I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem with corporate naming of anything. And when you start talking about naming a specific team, like the football team or the basketball team for that season, can you imagine next fall the, I don't know, J.B. Hunt football team?
Yeah.
The Arkansas Razorback football team presented by J.B. Hunt Transport? We wouldn't want something like that.
So many problems with that.
So hopefully they'll never do that. Hopefully somebody will get some sense and go, no, this is going too far.
I completely agree. All right. One more question this week, and it's from Blood Red Hog, who is back and says, I noticed your retweet of Darrell Walker mentioning the U of A had not retired the jersey number of Ron Brewer. Is there a department policy on retiring jerseys? Who are some recent basketball and football greats with retired numbers?
You know, they've developed a policy over the last several years, and it has to do with the fact that it is very difficult when you start retiring numbers, then you start running out of numbers, and schools are starting to realize that all across the country. I was surprised to learn this. I'm going to pass this on. There are only 3 numbers that are retired at Arkansas. Sidney Moncrief's 32, Clyde Scott's number 12, and Brandon Burlsworth's number 77. Those are the only 3 numbers actually retired. Corliss's number is honored. Betty Fiskus's number is honored. So what's the difference? Well, an honored jersey is one where you can hang it up in the rafters or whatever, but that jersey can still be worn by someone else.
That's good.
And you can understand the problem here, especially in football. They've already got the same number for guys on offense and defense because they've run out of numbers.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, Bumper Poole is number 10, but Davion Warren is also number 10.
Yep.
So if you started retiring a bunch of numbers, you wouldn't even be able to do that. So in the future, I think that's what you're going to see is, and so Ron Brewer, I think a nice thing to do would, yes, he deserves it. Honor his jersey number, hang it up in the rafters of Bud Walton, and right up there with Moncrief's, and that would be nice. But I don't think I don't think they're going to retire any more numbers.
Yeah, and I think you wanted to talk about the NCAA as well.
Yeah,
Arkansas
and
obviously
you actually know a little bit about that too. But we're just hearing some of the, this is not a normal situation in Indianapolis. It's not like when you go to a first-round site. They're all quarantined, apparently. So you get there, and the players have to immediately go in quarantine because they get tested, and they have to be tested for, what, a couple of days before they're allowed to.
I think it's 2 days that you're in quarantine.
So they can't even work out right now. They know who they're going to play, but they got to wait 2 days to work out. In the meantime, the players are in their rooms. They can't leave. Food is brought to them. They can't go anywhere. They can't talk to anybody else. This is like a mind game to me. It's like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. And so it's just so different from what we're used to. The NCAA is kind of a fun trip. This thing is like being in jail.
Way different. Yeah, I mean, all the coaches are in their own separate rooms as well. So everyone is completely isolated from each other. So I'm sure they're all calling each other up, trying to game plan for that game and stuff.
Sure. It's going to be interesting to see how it affects different teams.
Yeah, and actually, I don't think any of them are. So typically, I think the SEC tournament, they had people who were administering the COVID test to them. But now they're actually just having to do it themselves.
You do it yourself. They bring you the swab, you do it, and you stick it out.
Stick it out in the hall, and they do it, and it's a whole different experience. I think Eric Musselman's wife, Danielle, actually tweeted out saying that by 8:45 this morning, she had already gotten 3 calls from Eric Musselman because he's so bored right now.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that's an interesting fact. It's going to be interesting to see how it affects all of the different teams ahead of the first game of the NCAA tournament. But that's going to do it for our edition of Ask Mike. We hope to see you back here again next week.